Good day and welcome to another episode of the Sex series. This has truly been an incredible time. We've got to connect with exciting speakers over time, and we've really had some brilliant lessons being presented and just an opportunity for us to really explore how sexual intimacy is a gift from God. And so today we're going to be exploring the conversation further. We are joined by two exciting guests, Shiela and Rebecca, and they will introduce themselves shortly. Maybe else, I don't know if there's anything you want to say just about around how you connected with them, and just to share the journey a bit, because I think it's really incredible that they were even generous enough to join us for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lonnie. Sheila and Rebecca, we're really excited to have you guys joining us today. So we got in contact with Sheila and Rebecca, who are podcasters and authors and public speakers, and they just do really amazing work around sex. And what makes them super amazing is that they are a mother and daughter team. So we got connected with them. I actually was just sharing with them just before we started recording that I got sent this podcast at the beginning of the year. And I listened to this podcast and I thought, wow, this team is just brilliant. Some of the points that they're raising is just stuff that we never speak about. Everyone kind of like thinks it, or, at times you come across this stuff and nobody actually speaks about it. And so when Hloni and I and the team here at Gracepoint started planning the sex series, I said to Hloni, we have to get them on. And so we're really excited. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're really looking forward to this conversation. If you want to just maybe introduce yourself a little bit more about what you guys do, how you started doing what you're doing. We'd love to just hear about that. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Shiela Ray Gregoire, and the accent is Canadian. We are from a small town halfway between Toronto and Ottawa. And I've been blogging, writing, speaking about sex since 2008. And my message has changed in the last few years since we started doing research, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in a minute. But this beside me is my daughter, Rebecca. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rebecca. I'm Sheila's daughter. And the reason that we ended up doing this as a mother-daughter pair, which is absolutely weird, and we own that. We own how weird this is that I graduated from a psychology degree and had a real focus on evidence-based. I love looking at evidence-based solutions to kind of our everyday problems. But then when my mom wanted to do this really big research project to study, in essence, how the teachings in evangelicalism affect women's sexuality in particular, she needed a team. And I was trained in psychometrics, which is survey development, and we have another group on our book, another person on our book, Joanna Sawatsky, who's a statistician. And so the three of us together, with my mom being the main writer and the face of it, and then I do writing and editing and created the surveys, and Joanna did all the numbers and also helped with the writing. And between the three of us, we were able to create a research team that could do the largest study that's ever been done in this without any university funding, without anyone's help. We just did it.
Yeah.
And the result of what you guys have put together is just absolutely incredible. I remember when I first started listening to it, I had to at times just pause and think about what you guys had said, because it was just brilliant. And I've been really wanting to read the book. So now you've made me want to read the book even more to find some of the findings. So yeah, it's great to have you. If you want to maybe just give us quick, just in like a minute or so, just a little bit of background around the study, and just maybe highlight a few of your findings before we head into our first question, please.
Sure. So all of this started because, like I said, I have been blogging, speaking, writing about sex for years, but the one thing I hadn't done was read other Christian marriage books, because I have this real fear of plagiarism. So I'm writing all this stuff. Everyone else is writing all this stuff. I'm speaking at marriage conferences. I'm recommending other people's books that I've heard are amazing, because I figure they love Jesus. I love Jesus. We're all saying the same thing. And then one Friday afternoon in January of 2019, I had a migraine. I was looking for reasons to procrastinate. So I was on Twitter, and there was a conversation between some women who were arguing that they needed respect, not just love. And they were referring to a book which is quite big in North American churches, Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs. And I thought to myself, I have that book and I've never read it. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I went and got the book and I turned to the sex chapter and I read, to my horror, if your husband is typical, he has a need that you don't have. And the need is for physical release. And if he doesn't get physical release, he will come under satanic attack. And so you need to minister to him sexually as unto Jesus Christ. And why would you deprive him of something which takes so little time and makes him so happy? And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room. What is the result of teaching women that sex is not for you? There wasn't a single word in that entire chapter that sex should feel pleasurable for women too. And so as I'm reading this thing, I'm FaceTiming with Rebecca, I'm FaceTiming with Joanna, and I'm like, we got to do something. And so we tried to alert some power brokers, some stakeholders in evangelicalism to how harmful this book was, and no one listened to us. And so we thought we needed to go big or go home. So we decided to do the largest survey that's ever been done on evangelical women about their sexual and marital satisfaction. We ended up surveying 20,000 women. And South Africa was one of our countries, actually. I can share some specific South African stats with you later if you would like. They're a little sobering, just as a warning.
Definitely.
Yeah, just as a warning, you're not going to be that happy. But anyway. So what we did was we asked about marital satisfaction. We asked about sexual satisfaction, and we got like up close and personal. These were very explicit questions. We had about 130 questions on the whole survey, so it was very, very long. And then we presented them with a number of very typical teachings in the evangelical church and asked if you had been taught this or if you had believed it. From that, we were able to look at women who did believe something and compare them with women who didn't believe something and see if it impacted their marital and sexual satisfaction. So we were able to identify 4 big teachings in our book, The Great Sex Rescue, 4 big teachings that really hurt women's sexual and marital satisfaction. And again, we don't think these are biblical. We don't think they're from God, but they're very common in the evangelical church.
And maybe, I don't know, if you are comfortable, we obviously will encourage everyone to buy the book. I, for one, am already wanting to buy it. But if you're comfortable, what are these 4 things that you identified through the survey?
Yeah, do you want to take it, Rebecca?
Sure, I can take these ones. The 4 main teachings that we identified as harmful are the idea that a wife is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it. Boys will want to push girls' sexual boundaries. All men lust, it is every man's battle. And a woman should have sex to stop her husband from using pornography. And really overarching all 4 of those, the overarching belief is that sex is something that men need and women give. That's the overarching mentality, but these particular 4 subgroups, those particular 4 sub-teachings had devastating effects on women. Mm-hmm.
And after identifying these beliefs, we then read 16 best-selling sex and marriage books. 3 of them, we looked at Amazon top marriage books. 3 of them really didn't talk about sex. So we excluded them from our study. So we had 13 of the best-selling sex and marriage books, and we were able to identify which ones had very harmful beliefs and picked out a lot of quotes. And when you read The Great Sex Rescue, it's like, seriously, it's like watching a train wreck. You can't look away. It's like, no, they didn't say that. And we trace through how this idea that women are the methadone for your husband's sex addictions. That's literally said in Every Man's Battle, that you need to give him sexual release so that he doesn't watch pornography. That you need to give him sexual release even on your period so he doesn't watch porn, all because your period is a difficult time for him. Okay. Like all of these things are said in these books. And so what we were asking is, what is the cumulative effect for both men and women growing up in this? We specifically studied women. Since writing the book, we've also surveyed men, and we found some very sobering things with that as well. And we have another book out for men as well, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. But yes, it's time for the evangelical church to stop equating male sexuality with the objectification of women, and start seeing sex as something which is mutual, intimate, and pleasurable for both.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And just one of the things that Shani and I wanted to ask you, and you really answered so much of it, is what some of those teachings are that especially young girls, but not just young girls, but especially like youth and young adults have been taught growing up that really then cause it to become difficult for them to enjoy this God-given gift. One of the things that we are firm on believing, and that we've just premised the series as, is that sex is a God-given gift, and it's not just for one kind of person or for another, but that it's something that is accessible to all of us. And so we just wanted to find out maybe a little bit more, if you're comfortable sharing. I know you've already gone into it, but just what some of those effects of those problematic beliefs are that you have picked up, especially those 4 that you've highlighted for us.
Okay, can I do the OGAP first, Becca? And then maybe
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So first of all, the idea that sex is a God-given gift, I believe that. I absolutely do. I think very many people, when they hear that, don't experience it and don't understand it, because to them, sex does not feel like a gift. And here's why. It's just one simple reason. And there's many other reasons, but here's just one example. 95% of men report that they almost always reach orgasm during a sexual encounter. The equivalent number for evangelical women is 48%. So we have a 47-point gap. Now, I want you to imagine that what couples are told they need to experience this amazing close marriage is to go out to a restaurant and eat once a week at a restaurant. Okay. So I want you to picture a couple. We'll call them Doug and Tracy. All right. And Doug and Tracy dutifully go to a restaurant every week. And so here they are. They arrive at the restaurant, they order their food, and the waitress brings Tracy's appetizer. It's a French onion soup. She eats it. It's delicious, but nothing comes for Doug. And they are talking about their dreams for the future. They're talking about their next vacation. They're talking about their daughter's issue with piano lessons and should we continue. And then the waitress comes with Tracy's steak. And it's got peppercorn sauce and there's a baked potato and sour cream. And she's just, this is amazing. And she's cutting into it. It's a perfect medium rare. She loves it. She's just gushing over it, but nothing comes for Doug. And they're continuing to have this lovely conversation. And then Tracy's dessert arrives, and it's this molten chocolate lava cake. And she puts her spoon in, and chocolate spools there on the spoon. And it's amazing. And she's gushing. And in the middle of her chocolate lava cake, Doug's chicken wing appetizer arrives. And he eats one, and then he eats two, and he's just about to eat his third when Tracy stands up and says, "That was an amazing dinner. I love doing this with you." And she walks to the door and leaves. And Doug walks behind her, staring forlornly at the 3 chicken wings that are still on his plate. Now, imagine that they do this week after week, year after year. How much is Doug going to like eating at restaurants? And yet for so many couples, this is how she experiences sex. And what do we tell women? Well, it's okay, because all you really need is the emotional connection. He needs release. What women really need is the emotional connection. And you're still getting that because you're having sex. And so you're fine.
Sure. That's, I love that metaphor. I actually love it. And I'll probably keep it with me for a very long time. But it then takes me then to my next question, so it's twofold. One for the young, unmarried Christian, the other for the married couple. The young unmarried Christian, can you say that the distorted view of sexual intimacy can be owed to the church's good intention, where sometimes in wanting to make sure that young people do not engage in sexual intimacy outside of a safe space, which can be culturally interpreted as marriage, we would place that as a priority and give all these teachings, not caring what other effects those teachings may have. So I think of myself, for instance, as a teenager, I could not imagine this all-seeing God watching me have sex. I was like, oh, that is awkward. He's all-seeing. And what I've been made to understand is that this is water and oil. These two things can never be in one sentence. Mind you, I'm a millennial, a 3-letter word that no one dares write. In actual fact, if you want to vandalize a property, you write SEX on the school wall, and you're the coolest thing to happen after sliced bread. So I could not reconcile this God with the idea of sexual intimacy, one. So obviously, going into marriage, there's a lot that I need to unlearn. And unfortunately, my church does not have room for that. The only time I'm ever going to speak about sexual intimacy within the context of a church is during pre-marriage counseling. And mind you, quite honestly, all I'm worried about is my bow tie, my shoes, my socks, are my groomsmen getting their hair cut, and everything else is just an afterthought. And yet the church wants to squeeze in this lifetime teaching or help me unlearn stuff that I've learned throughout my teen years in this premarital course. Would you say, perhaps that's my first question, I'll leave it at that for now. Now, would you say how the church has handled and some of the stuff that the church has taught has had an impact on people's experience of sexual intimacy, even within the context of marriage?
Oh, completely. Something that we heard from so many women about what you're talking about right now, like all these there are these messages to try to get people to not do something dangerous, right? You're trying to protect our youth by saying, God's watching you at every moment. And if you ever slip up, picture your grandpa, like whatever the message is. The people are trying to protect the 14-year-old from, getting into a bad situation. But what's often happened in the church is that the message is not equal. What often happens is girls are taught very specifically that sex is something that boys will want to take from you. And your job, in order to keep your purity and to keep this person you love, your boyfriend, his purity, is that you have to be the brakes. We hear this all the time. Boys are the gas, girls are the brakes when it comes to sex. And so what often happens is you'll have a Christian couple who both are committed to saving sex until marriage, but he can rest easy knowing that she'll stop it before it gets too far. And this isn't it's not in the front of the brain. It's not this idea of he's like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want and she's going to stop me. But this is what the teaching ends up doing, because she knows it's her responsibility to put on the brakes. She knows that if she doesn't, he can't stop himself. Because even though they're both being told you should not have sex, only one of them is being told the other person cannot stop. It is your job to. So what we've heard from so many women is that when you're raised to believe boys will want to push your sexual boundaries, it's your job to say no because he won't be able to if you let him go too far, is they completely dissociate from their even totally G-rated sexual experiences, right? So when you're holding hands, you're not just holding hands. You're wondering, okay, is he going to try more? And then, okay, so now he's putting his arm around me. Is this too much? Do you think that I'm tempting him too much now? Okay. And you don't ever stop and just think, this feels nice. You can't ever stop and just experience like, yeah, this is nice. Whereas he's able to, because she will put the brakes on. And so what we hear from a lot of people is then when you progress in the relationship and you're sitting there and, you're engaged and you're making out and, you can sense like, okay, he's getting really hot and heavy. Where are his hands? Should I stop yet? 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 And then when you get married, you've now trained yourself at any level of physical arousal as a woman to shut off that part of your brain because you have to be in control. And so you can't actually enjoy arousal. You can't experience arousal. You can't let yourself go because you have spent years, literally years, training yourself that the minute you feel like you're starting to get out of control, you shut it down. And that doesn't immediately stop when you're married. And so what we're talking about with our research is this idea that one-sided sexual responsibility needs to stop. Girls are not responsible for being the brakes for boys' sexual desires.
Mm-hmm.
Girls also can desire. And we need to figure out a healthier way as a church to talk about this so that it's not put on the shoulders of the person who's more likely to get hurt. Because, quite frankly, women bear more brunt of sexual activity, right? Like one of us, if only one person's getting pregnant, and that takes a lot out of a person. There's a lot more risk on women than on men. So I think in a positive effort to protect our girls, we made sex really scary for them instead of putting the responsibility of sex onto young boys as well.
Mm-hmm.
Gills, do you know I had a purity ring? Have I ever told you that? So I actually had a purity ring growing up. So when you say that, so I went to a Catholic school as part of the culture. Grade 9, grade 10, you were taken to a Love Matters camp. Had the most traumatic experience. I'll actually share this. So I think I've told Els because we went to the campsite recently. So as part of the Love Matters camp, it culminates towards you guys signing a vow that you're not going to have sex outside of marriage and having a ring. Never mind the fact that this will then determine your faith journey your whole life, because the minute you come close to breaking this vow, it feels like you've just undone your whole Christianity. So I spent my teen years fleeing from sex before marriage. I didn't care whether I would grow up to be someone that exploits workers or every other thing that is important, but my spirituality was about me fleeing from sexual intimacy. But anyways, here's the funny part. I don't know, funny or gross. So anyways, in their attempt to drive the teachings around abstaining from sex before marriage, what our facilitators did is they took bubble gum. Now I can imagine you know where this is going. Asked the first person to chew that bubble gum and then put it in a jar, and then asked the next person to take it. And they said, you see, this is what happens when you have sex outside of marriage. Now you can only imagine the kind of thinking that instills in your head that the minute I have sex outside of marriage, I will be used good, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
So I had a similar experience growing up. I remember being at also, it's funny how these things always happen at camps, but I was on a camp and youth camp, and all the girls were taken aside and the guys were taken aside, and the girls had this conversation. I was a female facilitator and she had a rose. And we passed the rose around. It was a case of like, everybody smell the rose. See how beautiful it is, admire it. And then by the time it got around the circle, obviously by it being passing on hands and it had gotten a little bit damaged and tattered. And the question was posed to us, now, does anyone want the rose? Is it still as beautiful or as nice as it was before? And so, it was obviously the answer then is no, it was nicer before. And it just speaks into that whole purity culture. And I think that, Rebecca, that's what you touch on there, how damaging that culture is. And the intentions are good of the church to try and protect the kids, but the way that we convey the message is so damaging and so harmful, not only to the teen that then, isn't able to put the brakes on, to use the metaphor, and does go through with having sex. It's it's such a harmful thing because they often then feel that they can't get rid of this. It's that kind of like that Macbeth thing where they wash their hands, and the blood just doesn't come off. How they repent and they try to get forgiveness and they never really get into that. And that then often carries into marriages where one party has had sex before the other one and the other one doesn't feel worthy. And so all of these teachings are really, really damaging. Now, my question, how do we change this? What's the better way of teaching young people about sex that doesn't cause long-lasting damage?
I like to say, here, I'm going to throw back to you in just a sec. Can I do that?
Okay.
I like to say this, that our purity is not based on what we do with our bodies. Our purity is based on what Jesus did with his. And we need to get the emphasis right.
Love it.
We've also done a very large survey of women's experiences in youth group and how the messaging around youth group impacted how they saw sex, and telling kids that God intends you to wait for marriage for sex and sex is meant for marriage does not end up harming. That's not a harmful message. But telling kids that if you have sex before marriage, you will doom your sex life after, that is a harmful message. And so giving the good message helps. Whenever we give a threat, it hurts. And what we've been doing is we've been giving threats instead of giving inspiration and the why. Why does God want you to wait? Okay. I think you had something to say about that one, Becca.
I was going to say the stat that we found that you just
said.
I'm sorry. See, we're very in sync here. No, but what I was also going to say from talking to our focus groups is that we did our survey. I also did in-depth focus groups and interviews with people from multiple topics. And one of the topics we looked at was crises of faith in high school. And almost every single one of them, these women reported that feeling like if they had sex, they were damaged goods. They were used up, just like you said. What it had done was it took the Christian walk and it replaced the cross with a hymen. And so, yeah, you can repent, and yeah, you can get your what they called secondary virginity back in the throes of purity culture, where you just say some magic prayer, and now I guess you're like a secondary virgin. There was all this stuff that was going on, but as it becomes all or nothing, and so sex becomes so scary, but then you do it, and you don't feel like you can ever stop because now what's even the point? And when we're talking about this with our young people, when we focus on virginity as a sign of sexual purity, we're completely missing the point. Because virginity is not a lifestyle. There isn't like a virginity. You don't walk every moment being like, yeah, don't cross. I'm a virgin lifestyle. Like that's not what we do. It's just something that it's either you've had sex or you haven't. And if our sexual ethic only works if you've never had sex before, then it's not a real sexual ethic. It's just a label. And as soon as we become a religion that's about labels, we become incredibly elitist, we become very us versus them. We become very fundamentalist because it's all about maintaining the perfection facade. So when we're talking about these teachings that are doing damage, we have to look at the root of them and figure out, what are we telling our youth about? What do we believe about sexuality? What is this revealing in us about how we feel about sex? Do we feel that sex is an allowed evil as soon as you're married? Or is it something that is truly beautiful within its proper context? Because that's a very subtle difference, but it's a big difference. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, it's not a good thing, but if you have to do it this way, versus this is something that God gave us. And, similar to getting a driver's license, driving is good. Don't want a 5-year-old driving a car. There's a proper context, there's a proper place. But one of the things that we do in the Great Sex Rescue, I just wanted to shout out, is for people who are trying to figure out what to do next. In every single chapter, we have something called rescuing and reframing sections. So we take the negative teachings and then we show how to talk about it instead. So like, for example, instead of, I just pulled over the chapter on pornography. We often say to teenage boys, you are going to be tempted by pornography. We say that in youth group all the time. So instead of saying you are going to be tempted by pornography to teenage boys, say to both genders, many people struggle with pornography, but many do not. If you do struggle, know that this is a struggle you can overcome. So like, let's talk about how we can talk about this differently from a research-based perspective so that we can start to try to form a healthier sexual ethic as a church that's about more than whether or not you've got this stamp of virginity.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Rebecca. One of the things I found chatting to our teenagers was saying to them pornography holds the power to distort our view of each other was more meaningful. Saying to them that one day you're actually going to be connecting in the workplace and you don't want to view every second person of the opposite sex or opposite sexual orientation, whichever way you may choose to identify. You don't want to see them as a potential sexual encounter because you're meant to do business with them. You're meant to do life with them. You want to be able to broaden the possibilities of your relationship. Whereas pornography kind of says, every opposite sex can actually be a potential sexual encounter.